Hey guys, welcome back to another video. If you haven't watched the previous episode of this series, I highly recommend doing so because this video is going to be sort of a continuation of that. And speaking of the last video, I'm really glad that the video got the reception it did. I did specify that the idea I provided would be highly controversial, so I'm glad that people were able to start a discussion out of it. And yes, I do know the Assassin is due for a rework this year, but I'm going to use this video to talk about how I would personally go about reworking the class. And this time it's not going to be something as crazy as the Rogue video, don't worry. Alright, so let's talk about the Assassin. And I'm sorry in advance if you like this class because I don't particularly have many good things to say about it for the most part. So just for the sake of the Assassin mains, I'm going to start off with the things that I do like about the class. Crystallized Fangs Venom is basically a saving grace for this class in terms of late game viability. Although this item itself has also had some, history, but I'll get into that later in the video. Alright, so the stats on the Assassin itself aren't even terrible. The DPS stats cap at a total of 135, which is actually pretty high. It's on par with the Necromancer and only beaten out by Trickster and Ninja's 140 and Wizard's 150. If the stats are so high, why is the class so undesirable? Well, there are multiple answers to this actually, but let's start with its lackluster ability. Back in, let's say, 2015, Tomb of the Ancients were the meta back then to get life pots quickly. Assassin was the golden goose when it came to raiding this dungeon. Sit back, throw poisons, maybe throw a couple of pizza pockets in the oven whilst you're at it. Though, slowly, as we came out of the I need to hit soulbound meta into the my O3 run must take less than 4 minutes otherwise I'm gonna bitch in general chat meta, the Assassin just isn't quite cutting it. A fully decked out Assassin wielding corruption cutters and centaur shielding is sure to output some pretty good DPS, but so will most other classes, even those with lower max DPS numbers. Why is that? Like I said before, it's the ability. The Assassin as a class is a victim of, I'm gonna say it, that would be the infamous power creep. The class used to be really desirable for wave clear, but now we have items such as the Genesis spell for Wizard, Chaotic Scripture for Priest, hell, even the Wavecrest Concertina for Bard, which may I add, can do upwards of 2000 damage per summon. In high efficiency group play, let's use the Lost Halls as an example here. In most situations, the enemies are going to die before the Assassin's poison is even done ticking. You're lucky if you're even able to get up to 3 ticks before the enemy is killed, and that's surely because the more items that get added to the game, the more damage exists. If we were to think, what would be the Wizard set back in the Tomb meta? It would look, a bit like this. And remember, of course, Tablet wasn't the monster it is now. But if we look at what the Wizard can have now, here is a DPS chart of your average best in slot Wizard back then compared to now. That is almost a 3000 DPS difference. Do not get me wrong, the Assassin has also had a huge DPS increase, but what I'm trying to prove is that apart from an inconsistent armor break, Assassins provide little to nothing apart from the jobs that other classes can do so much better. Now I'll move on to my point about the Fangs Venom. If you've played this game for a while, you know that this poison has some history. When it was first announced, it was initially going to be a glass cannon poison which functions similarly to the Cloak of Bloody Surprises. On the public testing, it was an item which increased your attack by 25, but reduced your defense by 40, with the secondary drawback being that it didn't actually throw a poison, it was just the plus 25 attack. And then shortly after, it was changed into what it is now, a ranged armor break. However, it actually did have a buff since its release on live servers. Here's something you may not have known. Back in the October of 2019, the item had undergone a quality of life rework to make it a little bit more viable. The poison no longer armor broke the user upon use, the cooldown had been decreased from 5 seconds to 0.5 seconds, and the radius had been doubled from 2 tiles to 4 tiles. As a trade-off, the already minimal damage was cut down slightly and the cast time was upped from 0.6 seconds to 1.5 seconds. Again, the only reason I'm speaking about this item is because it's the only UT item for Assassins which can provide them with some late game relevancy, as well as maybe the Parasitic Concoction, because it does inflict a decent curse. My next point will be on the topic of single target DPM, also known as damage per mana. I know this may upset a few people because the Assassin itself is supposed to be a wave clear character, but it isn't my fault that Deca just loves adding single target bosses. The DPM is rather straightforward to explain, so I'll explain it quickly. The total average damage of an ability cast divided by the mana points it uses for one usage. For example, I'm going to compare the tier 7 poison to the tier 7 Wakizashi. The tier 7 poison has a DPM of 11, whereas the Wakizashi is 27. The tier 7 spell has a DPM of 31. Despite all of this, giving credit where credit is due, the Assassin's poison does pierce through armor, whereas the spell and Waki do not, so these values may vary depending on the situation. What's really sad is that there is a poison in the game which is pretty much designed to make the most practical use out of being used on a single target, and even that has a DPM of 16 due to its absurdly high mana cost. This of course being the Tyrant's Toxin. And even with all of this, it's really difficult to hit the sweet spot on all 3 cluster bombs. It would be unfair to compare something like this to the Genesis spell, because although the item has the highest DPM in the game, with a staggering 83.3 recurring, it also has a cooldown, whereas poisons do not. Actually, on a funny side note, something which is pretty good is that if they went through with the initial lab robe change, the spelling spell from the machine would have an average DPM of 1430. Honestly, just don't ask. Linking this all back to the point of this series, the dagger weapon class, unlike every other weapon class, does not have a class which was designed to output high DPS numbers. I mean, think about it. We've got warrior for swords, wizard for staffs, summoner for wands, though sorcerer can output some crazy high DPS numbers as well with the introduction of Lumia, bard for bows, and ninja for katanas. Dagger just doesn't have a set DPS class. The dagger class with the highest DPS values is the utility class out of the 3. And that really is saying something. I don't know. With this upcoming assassin rework, I'm hoping to see Decker approach this in a way to make the assassin the go-to DPS dagger class. What do I suggest? This thing is very on the nose, but I feel like it's heavily overdue in a game like Realm. Critical strike chance. When I think of an assassin in a video game, I think of a high mobility, fast striking class that's able to deal a hectic amount of damage. So here's my suggestion. To stay true to its original concept, instead of just dealing damage over time, that enemy is also marked, and when that enemy is marked, you and all 2 of the other dagger classes have a chance to deal bonus damage as a critical strike. The critical strike chance is not something I quite wish to put a numerical value on, because whatever I say, it could come with a lot of backlash, so I will leave that to the imagination of the viewers. So here is my question to all of you. If Decker was to add crit chance to Assassin, how would you make it work? Would you make it so only you could crit the marked enemy? All assassins could crit the marked enemies? What percentage of crit chance would you think would be fair for a marked enemy? Please let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching till the end. Until next time, friends.